Morning, everybody. Welcome to 5 strategies for transforming clients. Now, I had offered this class a few days ago on Facebook Live and on Zoom. There were some tech issues and only part of it ended up being recorded. So instead of trying to, re-record the parts that were missing and superimpose them onto the previous recording, I thought, hey, I have like an hour this morning. Why don't I just re-record this for people who weren't able to attend, who had asked me for the recording? So here we go. 5 strategies for transforming clients. Now, I'd like to start this with just a very simple question. And that's, is transforming a verb or is it an adjective? Who's doing the transforming? And when is it happening? Now, a few years ago, actually, this is more than a few, several years ago, I was at a training and one of the students at the training had an ab reaction. And I mean, like an ab reaction in the fullest sense of the word. We're not talking just like some tears or difficult emotions. This person had a full break from reality. They regressed to a really violent period in their childhood to the point where they lost conscious awareness of where they were. And it was my job to bring them back to the here and now. And it was really a difficult thing. I worked with this individual for about 2 hours, just trying to get them grounded back into the present moment, back into their current age, back into their body. And once I had done that, we just kind of chatted for a few moments, but I didn't want to do any coaching around that situation. I didn't want to trigger another ab reaction. And the energy didn't feel right to do that. This individual needed to go out and really continue to ground themselves in the present moment, which they did. And I didn't forget about it, but I kind of put it on the back burner. A couple of weeks later, I had run into this person at a restaurant, and they had said to me that they just wanted to thank me because what had happened was one of the most important moments of their life. Over that span of time in between the initial reaction, seeing this person, they had completely changed their life. They were out of a bad relationship. They were moving into a job that suited them better. Huge transformations. And thought, isn't that interesting? I wonder what happened in that space between. I had another client. This was several years ago again. And this client taught me a tremendous amount about the nature of coaching and how hypnosis and coaching is not purely technique driven. This individual had a lot of life changes that they wanted to make. And in the sessions, like the first couple of sessions, we did some techniques and it got some success. By about session 3, though, they just wanted to talk. And I thought, okay, well, why don't I just hold the space? We'll do this for this session because they have some energy that they need to get out. So we had a conversation. Of course, hypnotic principles still apply, the nice languaging and pacing and leading and those types of things. However, something very interesting started to happen. Because in that conversation, I just casually made a couple of suggestions of some things that they might want to consider doing, like after the session. Just small things that might start to make a difference. And when they came back to the next session, not only had they done those things, they started to do other things to help them to live more of the life that they wanted. They not only followed through on very specific tasking I gave around attending a class, they started telling me about other ways in which they integrated parts of our conversation. And the sessions went on like this, and they ended up making a tremendous amount of change very quickly. And I can't say specifically within the sessions what happened, except for the nature of our connection, as well as their willingness to follow through on some very simple suggestions about things that they could be doing in their day-to-day life. I had a third client. This is a client who was coming to me for deep trance identification. And they were in the field of coaching. They were coming to continue to build their coaching skills. So we did a DTI program, deep trance identification. This is very simply when you use deep trance to help someone step into the position of a model so that they can practice whatever skill or whatever mindset that they're trying to develop as the model. The end goal being that at the end of the day, once they've integrated the experience and those skills, that who they become is much more than who they were prior to the project, and so much more than their internal representation of the model. So we did the first project. We did another project related to the field of coaching. And this person then decided that they wanted to, out of nowhere, begin to explore something that they hadn't done since childhood. They were a very talented musician as a child, and just through things that happen in life as an adult, stopped playing. They ended up exploring taking up the piano again and making huge strides in their artistic ability, and now have fallen back in love with something that was near and dear to them as a child that they kind of forgot about. And all because they took a simple step of wanting to model in order to build professional skills that generalized out significantly to unpredictable and wonderful parts of this person's life. So again, is it that we're transforming the clients? Or is transformation the natural state, the natural way of being, a descriptor for the client as they're going through the coaching process and beyond? So before we jump into the 5 strategies, I want to talk about, just kind of lay a foundation here. We're talking about the 2 types of change that clients typically seek. You can think of all change work as kind of falling into 2 categories. It's going to be either therapeutic change or generative change. A therapeutic change is when a client is feeling something or doing something that they don't want to do anymore. This is like the typical hypnosis model, right? Like a client who wants to quit smoking, a client who wants to stop nail biting, that sort of thing. They say, I have this problem, I want to stop. It might also be a little bit more general, like I have this anxiety, I have this stress, and I don't want to feel it anymore. So they want to end something, and they might not have thought about before coming to see us what they actually want in its place. It's about an away from motivation, moving away from something that they don't want. Typically in this type of change work, unless it's like a highly specific thing, when clients present it, it's kind of general, like I have this anxiety, or like I smoke all the time, or I can never get a full night's sleep, that type of thing. Their language is in the realm of universal quantifiers, and in therapeutic change, we have to begin to narrow it down to specific contexts, at least at the beginning, so that we can start to create reference experiences of change that then generalize out. Now, the other type of change that people come into coaching or hypnosis for is generative change. This is when a client wants to feel or do more of something. They might already be doing it, and they just want to improve it, like a golfer who wants to improve their golf swing. Or it might be that they're moving in a new direction in life and they want to build on the momentum. So they're not necessarily moving away from something that they don't want, but they are moving towards something that they definitely do want. This could be highly contextualized. For example, the golfer who wants to improve the swing, Or this could be more general, like someone who wants to explore their spiritual side or get to know their inner self, that type of holistic type coaching. And generative coaching is about really moving the client in a powerful, purposeful direction. Now, here's the interesting thing. Neither generative or therapeutic change are mutually exclusive. In fact, both coexist and both contain each other. So in generative change, there are going to be points in most cases where we're going to have to do some therapeutic work. There's going to be things that come up in the coaching process that the client may not have even been aware of that may have been blocking them from having more of what they want. I do a lot of coaching around product development. So recorded products, writing books, putting out a new class, that type of thing. And inevitably, at some point, people come up against a wall, something that has emotionally blocked them, because learning the skills to do that sort of thing, it's not very difficult. But through this generative experience, then they're kind of brought face to face with things that need to be integrated or resolved and cleared. So within generative change, you also have the scope of therapeutic work that happens. Within the therapeutic side, therapeutic work is ultimately generative. You never know just how far a change will go. So if you make one change in the client's system, their life, that is going to balloon out in wonderful, unpredictable ways. Think of it this way. A client who comes in for, nail biting. Client comes in for nail biting. They have this habit that they don't want anymore. They might not know much about their own internal world. They might not know that they are so much more than the conscious processing that they're aware of, that narrow bandwidth that we're used to paying attention to. So if you give a client experiences that they are more than that, if you give them experiences of having the ability to alter their state, that has a huge generative potential, because they're no longer going to be able to relate to themselves in the same way anymore. And who knows just how far they're going to take that. It's like opening the door to a whole new world. So ultimately, as far as I'm concerned, all change is generative, all of it, whether the initial focus isn't away from in terms of therapeutic change or the general focus is toward in terms of generative change, because both contain each other. Ultimately, both are going to be generative, because the client will continue to change beyond the scope of the time together, beyond the scope of the sessions, and of course, in the space in between the sessions. And that's where we're going to be focusing today, the space in between sessions. So these 5 strategies, and whether the focus is generative or the focus is therapy in the session, these strategies work. We're going to begin with kind of the most concrete, actionable things you can consciously do to help the client to purposefully transform in between sessions. And we're going to move up into a territory that becomes more abstract, more ephemeral. It's more difficult to talk about it. However, when it's in place, this is where real powerful transformation happens. So we'll talk about that in the second half of this discussion. So some of these things, especially in the beginning, many practitioners will be familiar with. So if it's something you're familiar with, just hang with me. You might get a different perspective on it. And if you don't do this stuff, you might want to consider trying it. You certainly don't have to. These are just ideas. And you also don't think that you have to do all 5 of these things. These are just ideas that some will be appropriate for some clients, others will be appropriate for other clients. You might only do one of these with all of your clients, but this is just to give you some ideas and have you start thinking about the space in between sessions. All right. So the first strategy is future pacing. This is simple enough. Almost all of us have, learned this in your hypnosis or NLP class. At the end of the session, associate the client into future contexts in which they've, in the past, would have had the problem, but now they're experiencing the positive change. It's very simple. It's very important, especially if the change is very context specific. So a smoker, a nail biter, maybe somebody with a fear of public speaking. So we're not necessarily talking in terms of these bigger kind of long-term coaching projects. But once a very specific change has been locked in place in a session, then we do want to future pace it. Now, the basic is to associate the person into a time and place in the future where they're experiencing the trigger for the problem and also experiencing themselves being different. We can add on to this, though, because future pacing success is great, and it's only one half of the story. We also want to future pace failure. And we want to do this because at some point, somewhere out, like in the client's future, at some point, the change will fail. Or at the very least, there'll be an opportunity for it to fail. This is just the nature of the game. The further you go out in time, the more unpredictable life becomes because the more independent variables are coming in. So if that were to happen, we want to give the client a strategy for coming out of that, a strategy for managing it, and knowing that just because there was that one instance of it, that doesn't mean anything beyond that one instance. So we'll do two specific things within future pacing failure. The first is to build resiliency. So we're going to future pace a client out into a time and place and suggest that, there might be a feeling, an old feeling that you didn't think was going to be there, but was there. And then we're going to give them a strategy to get out of it. So before they even have the opportunity to kind of go down the sliding board back into the problem, they recognize, okay, maybe I'm not feeling so great. We want to give them an easy tool to help them dissociate from that and continue on the path of transformation. So the strategy I use, I got this from our friend John Overdorf. It's a lovely one. It's kind of my variation of it. We're going to leverage physiology to help the client change their state. So what we're going to do is we're going to invite them to relax the jaw, relax the tongue, slow the breathing, and expand awareness. So if you want to try this on, feel free to join in. Of course, if you're driving or operating any type of machinery, just pause this and come back later when you can. So when you're ready, just close your eyes and bring your awareness to your jaw. And just intend for the jaw to relax. Allow it to relax. So when you're relaxing the jaw, what you're doing is you're taking pressure off the vagus nerve, the central nerve system in your body. You're allowing a freer flow of information between the gut, the heart, and the brain, and all of the centers in between. You're also beginning to activate the parasympathetic nervous system, your relaxation response. So keeping your jaw relaxed, bring your attention to the back of your tongue, back where the tongue meets the throat. And very gently, very comfortably intend for it to relax. So this isn't something that you would necessarily consciously do. We just intend and let go. So it might be that the tip of the tongue rests on the roof of the mouth. And of course, you can bring your awareness to your breathing. And again, just intending for the breathing to begin to slow in the smallest increment of time possible. So it's like each out breath becomes a millisecond longer than the previous in breath. You can bring your awareness to the space in between the breathing. And allow that to begin to expand out. So it's like you can rest in that space in between. And as you do that, just allowing your awareness to expand out to all the space in front of you. All the space between you and whatever's in front of you, and even beyond that. You can expand your awareness even with your eyes closed to all the space behind you. And whatever you're noticing, moving beyond that, still. Moving all your awareness to the space to your left, to your right, even beyond any walls that might be physically around you. And just noticing how your body feels now. And then when you're ready, you can open your eyes and come back to the outside world. Now, in a session, this technique, this is something that I teach clients early on. And we'll do multiple iterations of it, usually like in the first session, because it's a real skill. So you don't have, the client is going to get to the point where they don't have to spend a long time doing this like we just did now, because you've built a pathway inside of their neurology. It becomes easier and quicker to access it. Expanded awareness slows the brain waves down, slows it down to alpha. The relaxed jaw, the relaxed tongue takes pressure off the vagus nerve and also the parts of the brain that usually are very reactive, the parts of us that like to talk. And slowing the breathing is going to give them more control over their physiology, over their emotional and behavioral response. So I'll teach this early on, and then when it comes to the future pacing, I will remind them of it. And in a situation where I'm future pacing, things not going as planned, I'll walk them through it again so that they have that experience of bouncing out of it. The other type of future pacing of failure, this is not going to be appropriate with every client, but there are specific clients where it is. The specific client where it is most appropriate is going to be with smokers. And this is future pacing failure and then changing the meaning that the client makes of it. So for example, with a smoker, there is going to likely be some time where they'll be tempted and they might pick up a cigarette. So when we're future pacing this, we're not going to say that they will do this. We're saying it might happen. So we're using very soft kind of Ericksonian language because we don't want to like put any direct suggestion in, but they need to be aware of this. They might pick up the cigarette and have a cigarette, and if that happens, that doesn't mean they're a smoker. Because, I've tried a cigarette in the past, didn't make me a smoker. One of the big problems that clients with these kind of compulsive behaviors get into is it's all or nothing thinking. It's black and white. It's either I am this or I am that. I am either that or I'm not that. So this type of future pacing, we want to undo that, to remind them that there's so much more. So if that should happen, which especially if the client has other smokers in their life, they have a strategy of managing it so that they can reset after and start again. So you're not going to want to do future pacing after every session. You're certainly not going to want to future pace failure after every session. You're going to be doing this when the change is highly contextualized and you know it's taken place, like, you know, it's very specific and the client in the space in between sessions, or maybe this is the end of the therapy process, that they're going to be going out into the real world and testing. That's when you're going to want to future pace this. The other time you might want to use future pacing is if you're going to be giving tasking in between sessions. So maybe the full change isn't in place yet, but they have a small step to take in between the session, then you can future pace that. The next process, or the next strategy, is dream incubation. When we do a piece of change work, whether we directly work with memory or not, we are changing memories. This is because the client's coming in for a therapeutic change. They will have lots of memories of having the problem. And now you're creating a new memory of things being different. The new memory being the scope of the session, unless you're actually like working with memory reconsolidation, reimprinting, regression, any of the NLP time-based patterns. We know memory creation and memory reconsolidation are taking place. There are two specific things that need to be in place for a successful memory reconsolidation. The first is that if you're working directly with memory, and if the client is in your office for therapeutic change and they're talking about a problem, you are working with memory, whether or not you directly work with memory. The first thing is that it needs to be active in the client's brain for a minimum of 10 minutes. This is the amount of time that it takes for the memory engram, for the associations to become biochemically unlocked. According to current data, that could change. For us, we don't have to specifically worry about this end of the spectrum, because if you're talking to your client at the beginning of the session about what it is that they would like to change, then it's already active in their system. In fact, they've probably been thinking about it a lot before they've actually come to the session. So we don't have to really be concerned about that end of it. The other component is that for successful reconsolidation, it takes time after the piece of change work. It can take 6+ hours for it to happen, for that new memory to become a bit more stable, a bit more solid. So it's very important after a session, especially if you're doing some kind of like heavy lifting, if you will, if you're working with some big emotional stuff, it's going to be very important that the client have some space post-session to integrate the experience, to kind of come back down to the here and now, to reintegrate into their day-to-day life. I often suggest to clients that they have some time scheduled after the session for themselves. If you are in a space that has some nature, especially trees, maybe your neighborhood or a park, it's good to go for a walk out in nature if you can. After a piece of change work, being in nature, especially around trees, naturally lowers the brain waves into alpha, which is an optimal state for integration to take place. You're also canceling out a lot of other information that could be coming in that could also be consolidated into that new memory that might not be as helpful. For example, somebody who comes to see us on their lunch break and jumps like right back into a stressful situation after they've poured their heart out, that's not always the ideal situation. It is the reality and it happens, but anytime you can suggest and the client has the opportunity to take a few moments of integration for themselves, definitely recommend it. The next part of the integration is that it doesn't fully take place. It's not really complete until the client has had time to sleep and dream. Dreams are really powerful. They do some very specific things. They allow us to rehearse new ways of being. They let us troubleshoot when things go wrong. And there's a lot of studies about this. And they give us the opportunity to sweep away negative emotions, kind of work through stuff at an unconscious level. This is according to neuroscience. If we take a broader perspective, of course, there's lots of other things we can say dreams do as well. But just for our purposes here, in terms of memory consolidation, we'll keep it within that scope. So we can leverage dreams as a part of both the therapeutic and generative process. And we can do this a few different ways. We're going to give the suggestion that the unconscious mind use the dreams that night to continue to integrate and make new connections and help continue the process of transformation. We can also suggest that, in the space in between sessions, the client's dreams at night will continue this process. And it's very easy to do this. So I'll give you some common strategies that I've used in the past, and the one that I typically use because it's short and sweet. The first is direct suggestion. So if they're in deep trance, you can be very direct and make the suggestion that tonight they're going to dream, and their unconscious mind is going to use those dreams in order to further integrate and help them to grow and to resolve emotions, and that they'll sleep deeply and comfortably. And even if they think that they hadn't dreamed, that's okay. That's just the unconscious mind doing what it needs to do outside of conscious awareness. The next way to do it is metaphor. This is if you want to be a little bit more specific about the type of dream that you'd like to suggest the client have. And the typical metaphor I would use for this is the my friend John technique, where you talk about another client and how, after the session, the other client, typically like opposite gender, who had some situation that isn't exactly the same as the client, because we don't want them to know we're talking about the client, but relatable, very similar. So we're creating a parallel reality. Anyway, so we tell the story of this client who went home and had this amazing dream. We're doing this in trance, of course, and then we describe the dream. And then at the end of that story, we can tag on like, hey, I don't know what kind of dreams you're going to have tonight. About learning and integrating everything that you're learning here now. But I do know that your unconscious mind will continue the process. It's not really important whether or not the client has the specific dream we suggest, because they're not necessarily going to. But what we're doing with that metaphor is we're seeding an idea of one specific way in which the dreams could work for the client's benefit. If you want it to be more specific, and I rarely do this, I might do this more often if I'm doing more of a DTI process with a client, more of a generative change, where you have them rehearse the dream a number of times if it's a specific dream. And by specific, I don't mean get lost in the weeds and don't get lost in the detail. But like if I'm doing a deep trance identification with a client, I might suggest, okay, tonight when you sleep and dream, you're going to meet so-and-so, the model, and they're going to show you something important. And then I'm going to have them in the trance, imagine falling asleep and having the dream over and over and over again. So that would be a rehearsal process. The next is fractionation, and this is an interesting one. This is at the end of the trance. You bring them out of trance, then you reinduce trance very quickly, suggest that they have a dream that is integrating the process, bring them out of the trance, drop them back in the trance, suggest they have another dream. Once again, I keep this open-ended, and it doesn't even have to be visual. It could just be like a kinesthetic or auditory experience or something else. And do this over and over and over again, all the time, implying that whatever dreams they're having are continuing to integrate, and their unconscious mind can continue to practice this tonight. So that's a very nice process. The final one is the covering all possibilities one. This is the one that John uses. I typically use it with classes and oftentimes with clients too, if I'm going to be doing dream incubation, just because it's short and sweet. And it goes something like this, because we're all sitting here learning together, and tonight, at some point, you're going to sleep and dream. And I don't know what type of dreams you'll have. You might have exciting dreams of clients transforming in wonderful, unpredictable ways, of yourself transforming in ways that you hadn't even expected consciously. Or you might have kind of more mundane dreams where the transformation's already taken place, and it's so integrated that it's just a part of who you are. You might have vibrant 4K HD in focus dreams of specific ways in which you can use these skills. Or it might just be a softer, more kind of sepia tone, less focused sense, a cloud of awareness of how you're transforming. You might have dreams with casts of thousands of people's lives who are changing because of you now, or just a few. You may think that you haven't dreamed at all. And in any case, you can let that be a sign of all of the changes that are taking place on the deepest unconscious level. So you can become fully aware of the room around you and back in this present space. So that's covering all bases, where you give the client lots of options, because then it doesn't matter what they dream. We want them to be consciously curious about how their dreams, if they remember them, how their dreams relate to the change. Because then, even if logically it won't have any connection, they're going to start to create powerful, meaningful connections. We also want to address that if they think they hadn't dreamed, every once in a while, I'll get somebody who says they don't dream. This is not true. Everybody dreams. If we didn't dream, we would very quickly go insane and ultimately die. So we definitely dream. It's just some people don't remember it, and that's fine. It's just the dividing line in biochemical environments between waking and sleeping is so firm that they don't recall it. That's totally fine. Typically, if a client says that they don't dream, it's not worth it to fight them on this, at least at first. I've run into enough people who really hold on to this belief vehemently. So instead, we would just say, great, no problem. So just imagine if you were, I know you don't, but if you were, then I might suggest. So that's dream incubation. Okay. So the next thing we can do, which is a lot of fun, and it's something that I do recommend that you consider doing with lots and lots of clients, and that is tasking. The reason why we do this is we know the change is still happening in between sessions. And, we see our clients, one session a week or once every other week or whatever the case may be. We're not seeing them every day. But, if I work with a personal trainer and I only work with them one day a week and I don't go to the gym any other day of the week, I'm not going to get the results I want. And the same is true here. We want to encourage the transformative process to continue to occur in between sessions. So I'm going to talk about specific types of tasking that we can do. But first, I'll say this, always do tasking with purpose. Do not give a task for no reason at all. The client doesn't have to know the reason. In certain cases, it's better that they don't, which we'll talk about. But you need to know the reason why you're giving a specific task, because you need to make it important inside of your own neurology that the client do this, because if they don't feel that you value it, if they don't feel that you think that this is important for them to do, they're not going to do it. So just keep that in mind. So the first type of tasking is compliance tasking, and this is typically done upfront. And this doesn't have to happen all the time. But, all my clients right now are either on the phone or on Zoom. They all have to fill out paperwork and send it back to me before we do the first session. That is partly record keeping for me, and also partly for compliance. When I work with smokers, I task them the night before the session to have the last cigarette before they go to sleep, and that's it. If they smoke the day of, I don't work with them that day. I don't have compliance. So if you're going to do compliance tasking, it's typically before the first session, or if something's happening, if you're doing a bigger coaching project, a longer-term coaching relationship, if something feels like maybe off kilter, you can use some compliance testing to reset. That is less likely to be needed. There are other gentler things you can do in that type of situation, such as focusing on the coaching relationship. But it's important to talk about the task, about the compliance. You also, just generally speaking, you need to have compliance in place anyway. Rapport is much better. You know, you only need compliance for hypnosis. You don't necessarily need rapport. However, if you want long-term transformation, you need to have deep rapport. And compliance is going to be one part of that. So the next type of tasking that we'll do is practice-oriented tasking. So this is tasking where the client is going to be doing specific things in between the session to practice the neural pathways that they've started to create within the session. So this could be starting a meditation practice or a self-hypnosis practice. This could be a gratitude practice. This is going to be important, especially like if you're doing kind of a longer term piece of change work, something that is complex and has a lot of moving parts, and you want to help support the client in the space in between, especially if it's something that's very heavy, where there's opportunities in the space in between the sessions for the old negative states to be reinforced. We want to give them ways out, and we want to help to instill positive behaviors that the client is likely to continue even beyond the coaching relationship once that's done. And we'll talk more about this, about the types of things that you're going to want to put into the practice tasking in the next segment. The next one is frustrating the response. And this is where the client wants to do something, but they're not doing it. And it's not necessarily because of fear. It could be a lack of compliance or just a lack of will to do it. And this involves breaking down whatever that thing is down to like the smallest steps possible, tasking the client to do only one step at a time each day until it becomes so ridiculous that the client just does the full thing. The typical example of this is the client who wants to start going to the gym, and you've cleared any like kind of deeper emotional stuff, and it's more of, you know, they just got to do it. So day one, great, put on your workout clothes, do not work out. Day two, put on your workout clothes, go outside, don't work out. Day three, put on your workout clothes, go outside and go to the gym, but do not go inside. Day four, walk up to the gym door, do not go inside. You see where this is going? It gets ridiculous, and the client just essentially says, fuck it, I'm just going to go work out. It's easier than doing the task that you gave. If you use this type of tasking, do so with a great deal of care. If the relationship is not in place, it's not going to work. Instead, the person will just give up and possibly give up on the coaching relationship. I very rarely use this type of tasking. You can think of it as a type of compulsion blowout for people in the NLP world. So, you know, use it only when it feels right. Now, the last type of tasking, this is one that I like, and I think it has the most generative and the most transformative power. And this is insight tasking. This is when you give a task that doesn't consciously appear to have anything to do with the presenting issue. You want the client to go do something in their day-to-day life, and they're not going to know consciously why they're doing it. And as they do this, eventually they're going to have a spark of insight. So, for example, kind of a very basic one, I had a client who had a lot of social anxiety, but I found out that in the past, they were into martial arts, they were into Tai Chi. So, and they hadn't practiced in a very long time. So I said, well, great. Well, your task is to start going back to Tai Chi, start going back to class. Knowing that they're going to have to interact with a teacher, they're going to have to interact with students, but they're going to meet people who are of a similar mindset, who share a common interest. If I would have just directly told this person to go meet people with similar interests, They're not going they weren't going to know how to do that. But instead, if we do this thing that seems really safe consciously and it's familiar, then it's easier for the person to do, which they did. And then they ended up making a lot of friends, and a lot of the social anxiety issues began to resolve and began to calm down. So I'm giving the tasking knowing full well what my purpose is for it, but I'm not going to tell the client that. If the client knows the purpose of the insight tasking, it's likely going to be a weak success at best, and a failure at worst, or they're just not going to do it. There are other types of insight tasking, that seem even vaguer or more vague. And you can set this up, and you have to do this hypnotically for this to work, because the client is going to have a lot of unconscious buy-in. And you can give them some sort of small, nonsensical behavior to do, like set out a piece of paper on the table every day. Don't do anything with it. Just set it out and set it down and look at it. And at some point in the next week, as you do this, something of great importance is going to occur to you, and it's going to be valuable for who you are. So we're going to load it up with a lot of suggestions about potential. And we have to calibrate that the unconscious mind is buying in, because it's the unconscious mind that's going to create the experience. The conscious mind is doing the physical task, but it's the unconscious that is going to create the connection and create the meaning of the task. We might not know what the meaning is. With the Tai Chi example, we know what the meaning is. With something like this, we aren't going to know what the meaning is. This is entirely generative. However, we know our purpose in doing this. We're purposeful in doing this because we're doing it to create the space to allow for communication from the unconscious mind in a way that the client hadn't expected. So this is insight tasking is really wonderful and very subtle, and tends to be kind of a backdoor inroad into transformation. So that's tasking. Now we're on to, I believe, number 4. Let's check my notes. Yeah. Number 4, and this is going to tie in both with tasking, particularly with practice tasking, and that is skills for living. These are going to be things that we're going to teach our clients and invite them to do that are going to help create change, but they're also going to support them in the long run. So there are 2 types of change, 2 ways, I should say, 2 ways of doing change work in a very broad sense. There's the instance where a client has a problem. They come in, they present the problem. We help them build up a resource that directly addresses the problem. So it's linear. So we have point A and point B. And what we do in the session is to get from point A to point B, straight line. It makes logical sense. This is called first order change. And this works great for certain simple problems. However, we are complex. We are nonlinear systems. So that's not always the best route. There is also second order change. Second order change is when you help the client experience resourceful states, resourceful behaviors that don't have anything to do with the presenting issue. It's a broader scope. It's, what are the skills that if the client had, this problem couldn't exist. Like this wouldn't even be a problem. So this is kind of a big picture. You're moving outside of the system. You're moving outside the nonlinear system and looking for other answers that are going to address that problem without having to directly map onto it. So what are the skills that your client needs that if they had, this problem wouldn't have even occurred in the first place? So that's second order change. And as we go through this, I'm going to invite you to think of sessions as partially being educational in nature, because the client is going to learn about themselves and they're going to learn about how to be in the world. So we want to also consider giving them skills for being in the world. So I'm going to go through some of the common skills that make it really difficult to hold on to typical coaching issues. The first, and probably the most important, especially if you're working with things like trauma or really heavy, difficult things, is going to be dissociation. This isn't like dissociating from reality. I don't mean dissociation like in the, in the psychology sense and in the diagnosed sense. I mean dissociation is the ability to step outside of a problem state and a context and to create emotional distance. So they can still be aware of the context, they can still be aware of the problem, but they have enough space where they can breathe, where they can be more resourceful in terms of their feelings and behaviors. The evidence shows that dissociation is one of the most powerful ways, for example, to help people work through PTS. There's a number of studies that look at, for example, the use of certain psychedelics, MDMA, in terms of creating dissociation to manage post-traumatic stress. So that tells us that dissociation is really important, and we can do it. We can do it in our sessions without the need of anything else except for who you are as a coach. So teaching the client to be able to step out, to move outside of that realm. And we can do that through trance. Trance is like a nice formal hypnotic induction is one of the most dissociative techniques we have. It will pull the client outside the problem state, and it'll teach the client that they can move outside the problem state. Trance can also create a space where the client is more willing, more open to talking about things that are heavier, more dear and closer to their heart. In terms of doing this even beyond the sessions, we can teach self-hypnosis techniques like the resiliency strategy that we did a few moments ago here to help create that space. And we do want to point out to the client's conscious mind eventually that they can step back. They've had a number of experiences in the session of being able to do that, which means in their day-to-day lives, if things should come up, they have a roadmap out. They can create that space, create that distance. So dissociation is a really powerful skill to have. The next is compassion or loving kindness. Compassion towards self is really a big one that a lot of coaching clients struggle with. I think a lot of people just in general sometimes find challenging. And if you can teach the client to be compassionate towards themselves, then they're going to be a lot more compassionate towards others. And that has huge generative possibilities. We also know it's really good in terms of our physical and emotional health and well-being. And the way to do this, especially if a client is very resistant or doesn't know how to tap into compassion for self, the way to do this, kind of the second order approach, is to have them just imagine, you do this in trance, close your eyes, just imagine someone that you really care about. And you can hold that image in your mind. And as you do, just bring your awareness to your heart and begin to imagine that you can breathe in and out directly from your heart. And you could breathe in for a count of 5 and breathe out for a count of 5, directly from the heart. Just nice, even breathing. And as you do, just picturing that person that you care for. And as you're breathing, just having a sense of sending love to them, flowing out from your heart and into them. And just feel what happens. And then just allow your breathing to return to normal and opening your eyes and coming back to the outside world. When we imagine sending love to someone, we're calling on an internal representation of that person. That's us. So if you're sending love in this way, I think you can also send it energetically, like outside of ourselves. So that's a different story. But if you're doing it as this type of practice, the client is sending love to themselves, the part of themselves that is represented by the image of that other person. If a client's comfortable with that, you can then take it to the next level and invite the client to associate into that person and feel what it's like to receive that love and notice the love that's coming back. So that's a nice way to begin to build compassion, sense of emotional intelligence. The next one, this is something that I recommend to most clients, is to start a meditation practice. Something you do daily. This is another skill for living. And it doesn't have to be long. Start with 2 minutes of it. Start with 5 minutes of it. Don't start with an hour. Start small, 5 minutes of it, just setting the intention. The type of meditation practice that I might recommend is going to depend on the client. It could be doing the compassion. It could be just following the breath. It could be working with a mantra or an affirmation or a visualization. Just be aware that if you work with clients who have anxiety, like that's the presenting issue, and it's fairly evident that they have it, or it's not the presenting issue, but it's fairly evident that they're a more anxious person, do not suggest sitting meditation. For those types of clients, things like mindfulness work are detrimental. Instead, for those clients, we want to suggest some sort of movement-based meditation. Walking meditation, Tai Chi, Qigong, yoga, dance, something to get the body moving. When there's movement, the amygdala, which helps regulate the fear response and help regulate the stress response, it can't activate in the same ways. It doesn't create the same level of fear. So if there's movement, the client can't access stress in the same way. Versus a mindfulness practice where if somebody has a lot of anxiety, they tend to ruminate on those things and build it up more. So with those clients, just suggest a movement-based meditation. The next skill is gratitude. And it's very common in the coaching world to suggest things like a gratitude journal. But the current science says that that's not the best inroad for creating gratitude. When we experience gratitude, the parts of our brain that are in charge of pro-social behavior become more active. We become better people. And it's not so much in the giving of gratitude. That's important. That continues the social behavior, the pro-social behavior, but it's in receiving gratitude. So the more comfortable one can become in fully accepting and taking on and internalizing someone's gratitude, the stronger the networks in the pro-social regions of our brain become. And the more likely we are to then further exchange gratitude back. So this is something that we can all practice. So in tasking clients, we're going to start with just becoming comfortable with accepting day-to-day gratitude. And as coaches, we can express gratitude. And I certainly hope that you express gratitude and appreciation to your clients just throughout the coaching session. And the reason for that we'll talk about in the next segment. We have two more skills for life here. The next is an interesting state. This is called in the yogic world, Turiya. This is called in some of the coaching world. Second awareness, which comes out of Carlos Castaneda's works. And it's the idea of being aware that you are separate from your thoughts. You are not your thoughts. You are not your feelings. It's about being aware that those things can be taking place, but they're not you. This is like dissociation, like at the next level. You can be aware of it, you can interact with it, you can change it, and you know that you are so much more than the sum of your thoughts and feelings and behaviors. So the way we can create this, one way to do it is to do a similar exercise to what we did earlier with relaxing the jaw and the tongue, slowing the breathing, expanding the awareness out, and also expanding the awareness inside the body, having the person imagine the body being like a vast empty space, hollow tubes in the arms and legs, lots of space for them to move around in. And as they're in this nice space, calling their attention to the fact that they're still having thoughts, they might still be having other feelings, and they can be aware of those things, but also be in this other awareness. If you do a lot of yoga work, you do things like yoga nidra, it'll naturally create this state. If you do longer hypnotic inductions, where the person is sufficiently deep, but not like zoned through the floor, they will naturally experience this as well. So we might not like task a person with a practice in between sessions for this, but we might find it useful within the session to give the client an experience of this so that they know going forward, when things happen in the outside world, they're going to remember that, oh, well, wait a minute, I'm having this experience, but this isn't all of me. There's more. So finally, the last is flexibility. And flexibility is a very important skill to have. The most flexible person in any system will hold the most influence. Flexibility does not mean being like a pushover, but it means the ability to respond, to be response able, and to change course when needed to move toward a common outcome. When clients come in, if they're coming specifically for therapeutic change, they're going to have a level of inflexibility. It's going to be built into the problem. If they had true flexibility, the problem would not be able to maintain itself. So that's fine. Excuse me. There's going to be some level of inflexibility around the problem. And a part of the coaching process is to help introduce flexibility into that. There are some situations, though, where it is evident that the lack of flexibility is the main point that is holding together the problem. It is the pin that is holding everything together. And if the client were just more flexible with themselves or more flexible in a specific situation, the problem would fall apart. So we, at times, want to introduce the idea consciously of flexibility. This is useful, especially at the beginning of a coaching relationship. If the client isn't familiar with the world of coaching, we might want to pre-frame flexibility because we're going to be asking them throughout the coaching relationship to do things that are challenging or might feel uncomfortable, or we're going to be asking them to have new experiences that they're just not used to doing. So we want to reinforce the idea that flexibility is going to get them to where they want to be. We need to be very careful when introducing flexibility because when somebody is particularly inflexible, if we point that out, it's going to create more rigidity. So this is where our hypnosis skills become really useful. So if I know that I want flexibility as a skill within the session and beyond with a client, I'm going to start to introduce it very, very gently. In fact, I'm likely, depending on the client, to introduce it before we actually do anything, like just kind of in the small talk. It's never really small talk, by the way. But it just gives me an opportunity to suggest some ideas that if the client thought that the session had started already, their filters would have been more rigid and would have been up more. So I might tell a story about, a client I just had and about they were having this, I don't know, this problem at work. They were trying to troubleshoot something, but everybody on the team, they had their one set idea and nothing was working, but nobody was willing to compromise. So how did they get through this? Well, they got through this because my client stepped forward and said, you know what? I don't think my initial idea was the best. So what else can we think about that's going to help create a solution? See, that client in that moment was able to step out of their own rigidity and start to become more flexible, and that encouraged the rest of the team to start doing the same, and they were able to think outside of the system, outside the box, and find a solution. Of course, like that's just kind of a broad general thing off the top of my head right now. If I know I'm going to be introducing it with a client, I might have a very specific story that is going to create a parallel reality to the client's presenting issue. So I'm going to present the story, and then I might just say as a one-off, the law of requisite variety, the most flexible component in any system holds the most influence. And then that can start to become a trance theme throughout the session. So I'm not going to point it out directly to them consciously, but as we're doing things, I might just repeat that short phrase over and over again. And it might get to a point where there's enough space where I can then say to the client, look, can I point some things out to you? Is it okay if I point things out to your conscious mind that are happening unconsciously? I'm going to wait for the yes, and it has to be both a conscious yes and an unconscious yes. We'll know it's an unconscious yes because their physiology will show it. Once we have that, then I'm going to say, look, let's talk a little bit about flexibility and what's happening here. You've had an inflexibility or rigidity around yada, yada, yada. In what ways can we start to become more flexible in this that are going to make a difference for you? That's kind of the direct inroad that we now have permission to go there with the client because we've set it up very gently first. And that is going to be a skill for life because they're going to take it well beyond the session and start thinking more flexibly, being more flexible with their own behaviors and their own emotional states and with other people. So there's, once again, a huge generative potential there. Okay, so now we're on to the last strategy. And this is not so much a strategy, it's more of a concept, and it's a little bit more difficult to describe because you'll know it when you have it. And there are some things you can do to help create it, which we'll talk about. But this is both the most important part of any coaching relationship. It's the most important part of any coaching or change work process. It's the most important part of transformation, especially in between sessions. And that is specifically the relationship between the therapist or coach and the client. Relationship is everything. It is not your techniques that create change. It's just not. It's the relationship that you and your client have. It's the frames, it's the presuppositions that the client has about you. It's the feelings that the client has towards you. It is how you interact with that client. It's the words you choose. It's how you pace and lead. It's the tonality, and it's your physiology. It's that space in between you and your client. You could have like the fanciest toolkit in the world. You could have like the most advanced evidence-based techniques. You might even think that it's the technique that causes the clients to change. But if the relationship is wrong, if there's something not quite there in the dynamic, the technique is going to fail. It just is. If the client hasn't bought in, if the client doesn't trust you, if there isn't a sufficient amount of rapport, if the client doesn't hold you in their mind as being representative of the change that they want, if the client doesn't hold you in mind as being the pathway to get there, it doesn't matter what technique you use. On the flip side, if the client trusts you, and I mean like a deep trust, if they connect with you, if they feel that you are capable of holding even the most challenging parts of themselves, stuff that they can't even hold on their own. If they know on a deep level that you have their best interest at heart and you're not going to do anything to harm them and you're there to support them. If they know that no problem that they bring is too big for you, then it doesn't matter what technique you use. It doesn't. The technique becomes a ritual. It becomes a context, a threshold point through which the energy of the coaching relationship flows. And this is so important. This is what's going to create transformation. When that relationship is on point, in between sessions, the client is going to follow through on tasking. Like they're, without a doubt, they are going to be firing on all cylinders. They're going to do exactly what you ask them, unless they come up against an emotional difficulty. In which case, they're going to bring that to the session and tell you, great, now you have another piece of the puzzle to work through. We're going to follow through on the tasking. They're going to have insights. They're going to be at an unconscious level practicing the change in between sessions. And because you represent the change that they want, they're going to be dreaming into their far future already automatically about who and how they want to be. What are the things that they want out of life that they might not even be talking about in the session, but you've inspired them to start thinking that way. Relationship is important. And there are things we can do consciously, and we absolutely need to do consciously to help build that. Things that, we learn on, day 1 and day 2 of any NLP or good hypnosis course. Things like pacing and leading. This is going to be verbal pacing and leading. This is also going to be nonverbal pacing and leading. And in many ways, more importantly, nonverbal pacing and leading. Pacing and leading with tonality. Pacing leading with our physiology. A lot of NLP courses talk about matching and mirroring. Be very careful with this. Matching and mirroring is not the cause of rapport. It is a symptom of rapport. When you are naturally matching and mirroring each other, this is like a huge neon sign saying, you know what, the relationship it's going in the right direction. We don't want to use that to create the relationship necessarily. And it becomes a little bit awkward, especially if you work on Zoom a lot. So what we want to do is to manage our own state, knowing that our physiology and our states are going to help drive the client's change. So we're going to be accessing our own emotional flexibility. So when a client is talking about, an aspect of the problem, we don't want to be like right out of the gate, like, yeah, this is going to be so awesome. You're going to change. I mean, like maybe if you're Tony Robbins, you can get away with that. But for a lot of us, that doesn't translate and it's a rapport break. So we want to pace that. Similarly, if we're helping a client to step into being more resourceful, we need to step into being resourceful. We need to go first, because then we're going to be sending off the unconscious cues to the client, giving them a roadmap. So we want to have state flexibility. It's really useful for us as coaches and therapists to be in an outward trance when working. So we want to, have our sensory channels open. We want to have as minimal filters as active as possible. We want to be truly present with the client. We need to feel their energy. We need to see and we need to hear what their unconscious mind is communicating that the words might not reveal. And what this is going to do, because we're calibrating to that, we're deepening the rapport by speaking to the client's unconscious mind, by speaking to the body. Also, especially if you're doing more overtly hypnotic things, I guess actually I shouldn't even qualify this with it, especially. I think it's actually in any coaching relationship. You need to step into your personal power, your authority as the coach, as the therapist, as the hypnotist. When in a coaching relationship, there is a power dynamic. the coach is going to be have slightly more, if not a lot more power than the client within that dynamic, within the framework of the session. And that's a good thing. That's because the client needs to see the coach as being the person that knows the way, the person who's going to be the leader. If you have two leaders at the same time, it becomes difficult at some points to help the client shift. At other points, it can be useful, but it's not always useful. So you need to be willing to step into your personal power when it's needed. And sorry, I am in New York City, so we get sirens from time to time. Along with flexibility of state and really owning your authority and using it gently and with great care, it's important for you to hold an unshakable, firm, concrete image of the client transformed. You need to see and believe them having the change and even beyond that. Because when you hold this image in mind, what you're doing is you're formatting your unconscious mind to track for when the client is moving in that direction, so you can reaffirm it. And also to automatically say and do things that are going to help the client move in that direction. If you don't believe your client can change, they're not going to change, or at least not in the direction that your client wants. Your clients will only be as good as you can see them being. They will always live up or live down to your expectations of them. So dream big for them. Dream bigger for them than they can possibly currently dream for themselves. The next part of this is to take the time, when we talked about gratitude, to appreciate and express gratitude to the client, to the unconscious mind, to the conscious mind, especially when they're really kind of doing a deep dive on things that are challenging. This is going to help create a more solid coaching bond, and it's also going to let them know that what it is they're bringing to the table is okay. So keep that in mind. Anytime you have an opportunity to affirm what the client's doing, whether it's to thank them or to just say, that's right, yes, you're strengthening that bond. You're also reinforcing behaviors that are going to lead to positive change. You're going to help create the space where they're more willing to take the deep dive with you. They're more open. You are also going to give them an unconscious pattern of success. Every time you say yes to what the client's doing, anytime they're saying yes to what's happening in the dynamic, you're creating a chain of success. It doesn't have to be a verbal yes, but it has to be an affirmation, either verbally or through the nature of the process. You're creating a series of yeses that are going to create long-term change. So there are definitely things you can do. The biggest thing is also being who you are, being authentic to yourself as a coach. Not every coach is meant for every client. Not every client is meant for every coach. When you are authentic with who you are in your therapy and coaching style, you are going to attract the people who resonate with you, the people who are like on your frequency. And those are the people you want to attract. There are some people who need like a coach to tell them what to do, who's very kind of, stern and corporate. Some people need a coach that is a bit more flexible. And it just depends on what your know style is. So know who you are and who you want to be as a healer. And allow that to shine through. And that's automatically going to sort for the right type of clients that are naturally going to create a relationship where you're both resonating and change is happening. And as you do this, I'll leave you with this thought. And it's an important one. Because the relationship is so important to the change process, it's important to keep in mind that hypnosis is anything other than a casual relationship. It's not. It's not casual. It's everything else other than that. In the coaching, in the hypnosis or therapy dynamic, you are with your client creating a sacred space. And that needs to be honored. And if you walk into that dynamic with a sense of that, with that sense of intention and purpose, you are well on the road of creating the types of relationships in the coaching world that are going to lead to tremendous transformation. So those are the 5 strategies. Just to recap: future pacing, success and failure, and remembering to reframe the failure and give a resiliency strategy. Dream incubation, so suggesting that the client can use their dreams at night to continue to practice and transform. Tasking, there's lots of different tasks you can give. You can give compliance tasking, practice tasking, frustrating the response tasking, and insight tasking, which happens to be my favorite, to help generalize out transformation. It's important to give skills for living, especially if you're doing long-term kind of general coaching, emotional coaching, life coaching, teaching things like accepting gratitude, starting a meditation practice that's appropriate for the client, or self-hypnosis practice, the ability to dissociate, the ability to cultivate other awareness that the client is not their thoughts and not their feelings, and any other skill that flexibility, of course, and any other skill that you feel is going to be most appropriate for that specific client given the context of the change. And then finally, the sacred relationship, in which change work techniques become the ritual through which the energy of the relationship flows and change happens naturally. So that's it. Those are the 5 strategies for creating transformation beyond sessions. I hope you found this really interesting. I hope you picked up some things that might be useful for you. And thank you so much for everybody who requested the recording, who couldn't make it. I really appreciate and love you guys. And I look forward to hearing about all of your awesome transformations. See you soon. Bye.